From inside adjacent but not adjoining radio booths at M&T Bank Stadium, it is the Banner Ravens podcast. Paul Mancano and Jonas Shaffer coming to you live in the wee hours of the final day of September on this Monday. We are going to talk about the Ravens' dominant 35-10 win over the Buffalo Bills to get back to 500. But first, the Banner Ravens podcast is brought to you by Toyota. Toyota has been building a legacy of excellence for years, from developing hybrid technology to upping the standards of safety and efficiency. Toyota is always innovating, always making progress. And with the superior line of in-stock SUVs, including the adventure-ready RAV4 and capable, affordable Corolla Cross, you can experience the legacy of Toyota for yourself. Visit buyatoyota.com, the official website for deals, to find out more. Toyota, let's go places. Jonas, a dominant win for the Baltimore Ravens over the Buffalo Bills tonight. What is your word of the day for this performance?
Paul, my word of the day is it's a twofer. It's a 2-for-1. It's crunch, which is the kind of run concepts that the Ravens used on that first wonderful, splendid play from scrimmage, where Derrick Henry got up to 21.29 miles per hour on his 245-pound frame. It's a very kind of football nerd lovers type play. It's not as common as a zone run or a power run. What it is a way to take advantage of a penetrating, gap shooting defensive line like the Bills. You send a couple guys to that second level and you basically bait one of the defensive linemen into rushing into the oncoming path of a blocker that in this case was handled by Patrick Ricard. That was something that apparently Todd Monken was very, very excited to use when we talked to these guys in the locker room. It freed Derrick Henry. It got the Ravens what they needed to take the only lead that they needed in this game. And I think it's a pretty good word, because what did the Ravens do all game but just crunch this Bills team? They crunched them with the run game. They crunched them with the pass rush. They crunched them in coverage. No room to breathe, no days off, no practices off. This was just a really comprehensive old school Ravens type win. It felt a lot like, late stage 2018, whatever stage 2019, Lamar didn't need to pass for anywhere close to 200 yards, and yet they still ran away with this thing against a team that I think most people were appropriately calling the best team in the NFL through 3 weeks.
Crunch was first used, according to dictionary.com, between 1795 and 1805, and it's a mix between craunch, C-R-A-U-N-C-H, and crush. I think all three words, crunch, craunch, and crush, could all apply to this victory. That set the tone. That 87-yard Derrick Henry run on the first play from scrimmage for the Ravens offense, and it was just gangbusters from there. There was a time early in the second half where you started to get maybe not nervous, but give them the eyes emoji, get a little bit of concern, perhaps light concern, that the Ravens might be headed down a similar path that they have been down far too many times over the last few years, when the Bills cut it to an 11-point game. But then the Ravens put their foot on the pedal and ran away with this one. And Derrick Henry deserves a lion's share of the credit in this one, because he came up just short of 200 rushing yards on the day. He had a rushing touchdown, that first play, obviously. He had a receiving touchdown. By halftime, the Ravens were outgaining the Bills 281-90, 146-55 on the ground, 135-35 through the air. These are two quarterbacks, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, drafted in the same year. Both guys have always been playing second fiddle to Patrick Mahomes. Lamar has the two MVPs. Josh Allen is surely going to get one over the course of his career. Lamar Jackson was by far the better quarterback today. The Ravens defense was by far the better unit of the Bills defense and the Ravens unit. And Derrick Henry showed exactly why the Ravens were willing to invest $16 million in this guy.
Yeah, he's the NFL's leading rusher through 4 weeks, obviously pending Monday Night Football, and he's done it with an offensive line that the expectation, I think, Paul, is it's only going to get better. Obviously, the big news pregame, no Andrew Voorhees, but no Andrew Voorhees, no problem. Patrick McCary, slips in there, gets completes the infinity gauntlet of starts up front. He's now started at all 5 spots along that offensive line, which is a pretty remarkable accomplishment for a guy who did not get drafted coming out of Cal 6-7 years ago. And I think probably no better indication of just what the Ravens were able to do tonight with their offensive line and setting the line of scrimmage than my favorite stat, the rushing yards before contact per carry. It was over 5 yards per contact. That is the most since the start of 2023 season. Expand the time span to like 2018. It's a top 10 mark for any team in that span. So that is what is capable when you have Lamar Jackson. That is capable when you have Derrick Henry. You put those 2 bad mofos together behind an offensive line that was hitting its marks today against a Bills defense that did not want to play, from behind, that did not want to line up in ways that they are not really comfortable with doing. And we can talk more about that kind of X's and O's, cat and mouse game. Then you're going to get a rushing offense that went as gangbusters as it did. I mean, I think the only disappointment, Paul, was that the Ravens could not eke out that 1 more yard for Derrick Henry so that he could get 24 carries for a even 200 yards. He had to settle for 199 and a very healthy 8.3 yards per carry.
They certainly tried on that last possession. They fed him a couple times, and then he ended up catching a pass out of the backfield. I thought they might just run it 3 times, and he just couldn't get those final couple yards. That was the only time today he came up short. But you mentioned the cat and mouse game, and you asked John Harbaugh about it in the post-game press conference. What do you think allowed the Ravens to exploit the Bills on the ground today? Because it wasn't just Derrick Henry, even though he was absolutely phenomenal. It was Justice Hill, too, showing every week why he deserves the extension that the Ravens just gave him. He's been off to an outstanding start for this season. He had a touchdown in the second quarter on that wheel route, matched up against a linebacker, shook him out of his boots, caught that pass wide open in the end zone. He showed a ton of burst. Again, the lightning to Derrick Henry's thunder. What was it from an X's and O's perspective, Jonas, that you think allowed the Ravens to dominate on the ground?
I think it was just a simple matter of the Ravens can line up in heavy personnel with Patrick Ricard, who had another great game. It seemed like he, barely got a snap off for those first 2 drives against a Bills team that, if we are, conspiring to talk about a potential rematch, will in the playoffs, will possibly have Matt Milano, their all-pro linebacker, back, possibly have Terrell Bernard, their starting linebacker and last year's leading tackler because Milano was hurt, back. Teron Johnson, obviously a really, really good run defender as that slot corner. All 3 guys missing for whatever reason, maybe other than that first half against Arizona in week 1. Teams just had not been able to take advantage of that somewhat compromised spine. The Ravens clearly were able to do a much better job of that. They were able to get hats on hats with Pat Ricard. They were able to, take this Bills defense and put it in uncomfortable spots. We talked about in the pregame pod, Paul, about how Buffalo was basically, religiously opposed to playing anything but nickel or dime. So that's 5 DBs on the field, 6 DBs on the field tonight, because of the, rock and a hard place that the Ravens had them, because there were situations where they just could not stop this Ravens run game. They played 14 snaps of base personnel, which is a really, really important and I think meaningful concession to just how well the Ravens were running their offense. You want to put teams in uncomfortable spots, and the Ravens were able to do that. John Harbaugh was kind of joking with me on Wednesday, like, it sure would be nice to know if Buffalo has any plans to get smaller or get bigger guys on the field, because that's obviously going to help the Ravens when they have their own play calling, ups and downs too. You want to have smaller, or you want to have slower linebackers that can't cover Isaiah Likely in space. You want to have slower linebackers that can't cover Lamar when he's running out those read option plays and getting into space. So I think the fact that the Ravens were able to basically bully this Bills defense that had no trouble aside from that first half of week 1 and say, this is the way we play, you're going to take it and like it. I think there's probably no more symbolic victory for this Ravens team than the fact that they were able to tell the Bills, this is what you're going to do today. take it or leave it.
Yeah, it's one thing to do this against the Dallas Cowboys, who have shown really no ability whatsoever to stop the run so far this season. And it's another thing to do this against a Bills team that was 3-0 coming into this game. And large portion of that was their defense. And this is the kind of multiple aspect of the offense that John Harbaugh promised. There's been too much talk, perhaps, about identity. We've talked about it ad nauseum on this podcast before. And the Ravens showed once again that, yes, when all things are equal, they're going to lean into the run. They're going to try to beat you in the line of scrimmage, and they're going to lean into Derrick Henry and that running game and get a little bit of contribution from Lamar Jackson in the running game, which they did again tonight. 6 carries for 54 yards, right in the sweet spot. Nothing crazy, not double-digit carries, but he was also effective on the ground, scoring a rushing touchdown and averaging 9 yards per carry. But also, the Ravens didn't need a whole lot from their wide receivers or even their tight ends in this game. Justice Hill was the leading pass catcher in this game, 6 catches for 78 yards. Next was Derrick Henry, 3 catches for 10 yards. No wide receiver, no tight end had more than 2 catches in this game. 1 catch for 10 yards for Zay Flowers. Mark Andrews got 1 target, I believe, 1 or 2 targets, and he had that dropped pass, which is not a great the slow start to the season for Mark Andrews continues. But the Ravens didn't need all that from their wide receivers. They didn't need all that from their tight ends, at least in the passing game. They just had a heavy dosage of Derrick Henry on the ground and a heavy dosage of Justice Hill through the air.
Yeah, no better indictment of the obsession with fantasy football, or the pervasiveness of fantasy football, that you have the Ravens taking the Bills out to the woodshed, beating them 35-10. And yet I look at my Twitter timeline right now, and Mark Andrews is just trending. Like a lot of people not happy with taking him in round 2, round 3.
Greg
round 4,
Roman is probably trending as well.
He was actually trending earlier today because there was a clip of Justin Herbert smashing his tablet or his helmet on the sideline, and someone saying, like, I'd never seen Justin Herbert this unhappy. And of course the quote retweet was like, well, buddy, this is his first time in the Greg Roman offense.
This is life. Yeah, life under Greg Roman.
Yeah, I mean, like, again, it's another weird receiving box score. Justice Hill, 6 catches, 6 targets, 78 yards, made something out of nothing countless times, just was looking like an and one mixtape out there with the kind of moves that he was putting on dudes. Again, Bills linebackers and safeties who are not especially slow-footed, and you would think would have been well suited to matching a guy like that in space. But Justice Hill, as John Harbaugh has repeatedly told us, just finds new and innovative ways to get better, to become the back that he was supposed to be, I guess, and maybe even exceed that coming into the NFL. 5-6 years ago at this point. He's a great pass blocker. He's a great runner. He's obviously turned into a great receiver. 78 yards, 1 touchdown kind of says it all. And I think to have this 2-headed monster now with Derrick Henry, Justice Hill, we can maybe kind of table this discussion for later, but it almost kind of makes me wonder what is going to be the Keaton Mitchell role in all of this, when Derrick Henry is a guy who gets better the longer the season goes on, the more carries he gets in a game. Justice Hill obviously has a very important role on those obvious passing downs. So, Keaton Mitchell is someone who is very much on the tongue, on the lips of Ravens fans as they wait for his return in maybe, a month and a half, 2 months time. But it's tough to see how significant a role he could have when this Ravens backfield is as strong and impressive as it was tonight.
Maybe the Ravens will bench Derrick Henry after that fumble at the goal line.
That's true.
Maybe they should bench Roger Rosengarten for picking up that fumble. I thought for sure he jumped on that thing. No harm, no foul, because who was it? Patrick Ricard ended up recovering that in the end zone. But that was almost a scary play for half a second. But the Ravens were able to pick that up. That was perhaps the only blemish of Derrick Henry's day. Over on the defensive side, the Ravens defense started the game by forcing punt, field goal, punt, punt, punt in the first half from a Bills offense that was even more formidable than their defense coming into this game. They had just hung 47 points on the Jacksonville Jaguars. Josh Allen had a perfect touchdown to interception ratio coming into this one, which he kept. He didn't throw any picks in this game. Did have a massive fumble forced by Kyle Van Noy, who we'll get to in just a bit. But from your perspective, Jonas, What was more impressive from the Ravens defensive side? Was it the secondary or was it the pass rush?
I think probably the pass rush, just because for me, philosophically wise, that's kind of where it starts. Travis Jones was just unbelievable inside, just clubbing every single guard or center who got in his way. Adafe Owe was doing nice stuff, beating guards when he matched up against them, chasing after Josh Allen to get his, third and a half sack this year. Um, you know, Kyle Hamilton doing what he had to, Marlon Humphrey, buzzing off the edge. It was a defense that finally looked more like the vintage unit that we saw last year. It seemed like every Sunday here in Baltimore with creative pressures, a nice marriage between the pass rush and the secondary, the run defense. This run defense probably even better than any run defense the Ravens had last year or maybe in recent years. Again, James Cook, 9 carries, 39 yards. Josh Allen, 5 carries, 21 yards. And I think the bulk of that production was probably on scrambles. So really a lot to like. But again, it's just I did not expect in any way that Kyle Van Noy would have the kind of season that he's having, considering it seemed like last year was going to be a high water mark for him, and guys his age, age 33, just do not do these kind of things as impressively and as efficiently as he's doing it.
Yeah, I mean, he signed that 1-year deal last year, balling off the couch with the Ravens. And you thought he hits a career high in sacks, and you thought this is going to be the only time that he's going to do this. And you worried about him being a 1-year wonder when the Ravens re-signed him. And the Ravens had a chance to re-sign a lot of those guys that they hit on those 1-year contracts. Ronald Darby was another one. Obviously, Jadeveon Clowney, Arthur Mollett, who they ended up bringing back. Kyle Van Noy's been the best of that group so far. I mean, Jadeveon Clowney right now, I think he has 1 sack in Carolina.
Yep, just the 1 sack.
Darby, I think, has been pretty good from what I've seen in Jacksonville, but that team is pretty trash. Arthur Mollett is still hurt to start the season. He might contribute later, but Kyle Van Noy, shockingly, the oldest one of this group, I think, has been the best guy in this entire group. And he had that strip sack fumble, which halted the momentum for Buffalo. They were starting to get it back a little bit. I don't know what the heck the Bills were thinking on that play call that allowed the Ravens to get the strip sack and the turnover. But Kyle Van Noy has absolutely raised the floor of this pass rush for a group that has definitely needed it.
Yeah, they talking with our colleague Gianna Hahn about the pass rush earlier today, and the Ravens had been racking up the sacks to a good degree, I think we can say, over the first 3 weeks, but the pressure percentage just had not been where it should have been, and I think that was reflected in their failure against the Raiders and then their collapse against the Chargers. Ravens pressure rate, according to PFF, over the first 3 weeks, 26.7%, 29th in the NFL. Tonight, 37.8%. That's top 5, top 10 range. And I think you really felt that, when the Ravens needed to get home, even if they weren't able to bring Josh Allen down, they were able to flush him to his right. And aside from that one time where he somehow found Khalil Shakir 56 yards downfield, there was really not much opportunity for him when he was trying to make plays, out of the pocket, out of structure. And that's a great sign, that we haven't had a classic game from Nnamdi Madubuike, that we, haven't seen the best of Adisa Isaac or a David Ajabo as they kind of get their feet underneath them. And yet we are getting flashes again tonight against a Bills offensive line that I think ESPN had first in their pass block win rate. So great signs from this Ravens pass rush, and a really impressive job in the back end too, with just gloving things up when you had to. Marlon Humphrey forcing the first incompletion to Khalil Shakir all season. The tight ends could not really do anything. Keon Coleman had a couple really nice catches along the sideline, but I think Brandon Stevens pretty much defended those as well as you possibly can without turning your head around and actually getting your hand on the ball. I mean, those are just plays where you kind of tip your cap and say, let's see you try to do it again. And I think the Ravens have to be very, very happy about what they did, especially after the flaming mess that was the fourth quarter against Dallas.
Yeah, and he did it again. I mean, Keon Coleman had a couple of those catches in this game, but that's who he is. He's not going to get a lot of separation. He's my draft crush. Jonas, you remember this? Early second round pick by the Bills. Not going to get a whole lot of separation, but who needs separation when you can make those kind of acrobatic catches that he did? This was a game where the Ravens could kind of puff their chest, and it was a game where they could kind of, show the world that they are still a formidable team in the AFC. They were the number 1 seed last year, and they were 1-2 coming into this game. And you thought there were signs that this team was going to take a massive step back. And then you got classic primetime Ravens. You got classic primetime Lamar Jackson, and on a day when the Steelers went from unbeaten to 3-1. You saw the Browns lose again in embarrassing fashion as they continue to just trip all over themselves. The Bengals finally got their first win. They're 1-3 though, as the Ravens prepare to face them in week 5. This was an impressive statement win all around. This was their first complete win of the season. I think you could say it was trending that way in the Cowboys game last week before things kind of went to crap and they ended up only winning by 3. But this was a dominant performance that we saw from this team time and time again last year at home, under the lights, prime time. It was just kind of a reminder that this team is not going anywhere. And I think for all the fans that took a slight exhale last week, getting that first win, getting the monkey off their back, I think that this was a full confidence rebuilding game for the fan base, for the team itself. I mean, Harbaugh was kind of puffing his chest after this one and saying, this is who we are. This is our team. Do you think that they're closer to this version of themselves, or should we not overreact to a dominant win facing a Bills team that was a little bit banged up coming into this one?
I think if you had talked to John Harbaugh before the season, before training camp, he would have told you, and if you'd given John some true serum, I think he would have told you that he would have thought that this year's team could be better than last year's team, which is incredible because last year's team, until the game where they really needed it, was one of the best teams in recent NFL history. And obviously, you think about how the Raiders game went, which, gosh, the fact that it only happened 2 weeks ago in this very stadium, it just makes it seem like it's like us talking about the 2020 election or something. It just seems so far removed after a night like tonight. That's even after the Cowboys game, you kind of wonder where that belief comes from. But then they take this great Bills team to the absolute woodshed and dominate through all 3 quarters. I think there were probably a lot of people getting into Twitter, priming their fire John Harbaugh tweets as soon as that second straight Ravens 3 and out in the third quarter led to the Bills getting to midfield, and then before Kyle Van Noy kind of rescued them. But even though the clock management from John Harbaugh, has been an issue, even though obviously the collapses have been an issue over his tenure, I think people overlook just how rare it is for a team to win as many of these just like high profile showdowns as thoroughly as the Ravens have. They don't get blown out, but they sure do blow a lot of really good teams out. And I know one win is one win, but credit to John Harbaugh and this coaching staff for putting this team repeatedly in a position where wins like this are possible, because you look around the league and they really aren't. I mean, so many of the best teams year in and year out have to scrap for those 11 or 12 wins. And it's anyone's guess as to how this Ravens regular season will finish. But the fact that, this Ravens team led by John Harbaugh was able to smack down this Bills team that, like I said, was looking pretty close to flawless is a great testament to his leadership and just how he was able to get these guys prepared and outmatch and outwit a really highly esteemed Bills coaching staff.
And now they have a chance to get through this 5-week gauntlet to start the season at 3-2. And then you look beyond that, and I think it's important that they try to get that win to get above 500, because we were kind of looking at that first 5-week stretch and saying this is going to be the hardest stretch all season.
Should we talk about the game 6 now and the
Commanders?
Good Lord.
The Commanders are facing them in week 6. I know it's here at M&T Bank Stadium, but they look like a juggernaut. They're going at Tampa. That's still a winning team that made the playoffs last year. And then we're looking at Cleveland. That might be the easy one so far in the season before they face the Broncos at home. So there's no, you come into a season with expectations of who's going to be good, who's going to be bad, and then things change a few weeks into the season. But it is critical that this team tries to get to 3-2 as they face the Bengals next week in Cincinnati next Sunday.
Yeah, I think probably, and this is a knock on wood type statement, but I think probably the thing that is getting overlooked the most is just how unbelievably healthy this Ravens team is. I mean, obviously, I think if Andrew Voorhees was as close to being ready tonight as he looked to be pregame, then I think you could probably say, pencil him in for next week. I don't want to jump the gun on that, but just based on how he was moving on Friday and then tonight, I think probably safely say that it's more likely than not that he's back. Don't know about Michael Pierce with him reappearing on that injury report with the shoulder injury after being a full participant on Thursday and Friday. But you look at who the Bills lost tonight. Derrick Henry basically knocking Taylor Rapp out of this game with one of those just domineering, imposing sideline runs. The Bills dealing with coming and going from Khalil Shakir with Connor McGovern, and the Ravens might get Arthur Maulet back next week with him coming off injured reserve. Everyone else seems to be in pretty good shape health-wise, and you compare that to what Pittsburgh's going through, where I think they might have lost another offensive starter tonight or today with losing Daniels. I think one of their starting guards. Maybe it was just gone for a little bit in that game. Maybe it was something more serious. But the Ravens are maybe the healthiest team in the NFL in terms of like key parts that are still intact. It's just again, that's a reflection of good luck, yes, but also the strength and conditioning program, how John Harbaugh, modulated their approach through preseason, through training camp, practice. Eventually, that luck is probably going to start to sour a little bit because the injury rate in the NFL is 100%. But the fact that the Ravens have so many of these important pieces in practice and in their lineup, that's going to, I think, eventually, pay even more dividends down the road as they get it, matched up with some of these teams that are having to start, four-string rookies or guys who just do not have the kind of expertise in their respective systems like the Ravens do, with all these guys who are still coming back and playing in theirs.
Yeah, right guard James Daniels for the Steelers left that game with an ankle injury for Pittsburgh, their game against the Colts, wearing a walking boot. And I think they also lost Cordero Patterson in that game. So guys are getting banged up left and right. And like you said, knock on wood, this Ravens team is pretty healthy. And I just remember 2 weeks ago, like it was, like you said, 4 years ago, but talking about the Raiders game and saying this team is 0-2 and they're healthy. That's an indictment of their inability to rise to the moment. And what do? They rise to the moment against the Bills today, and they're healthy. And now it feels like icing on the cake instead of a further indictment. We will have another podcast for you Thursday to preview their game against the Cincinnati Bengals. It's going to be a busy week here in Baltimore, Jonas.
What else is happening?
Well, across the street, the Baltimore Orioles will begin their best of 3 wildcard series against the Kansas City Royals, which I know you will be locked in for that one. You'll be listening to the Banner Baseball Show, I'm sure, all week, subscribing, liking, and listening to the great work of Daniel Allentuck and Andy Koska and myself.
Does George Brett still play for the Royals?
He does. He does, in fact. Yeah, he's like in his 60s or 70s, and he still rocks the tight pants.
He's the Calais Campbell of Major League Baseball.
I like how your knowledge of baseball ends in what, the 70s, the 80s. I mean, the most recent.
I know they got Bobby Witt, right? That's all that matters.
Junior, not senior, junior. So, yeah, a name there. It's going to be a busy week, Jonas, and there will be plenty more coverage. There's more coverage from this game that you can read on the BaltimoreBanner.com, or you can subscribe just $1 for 6 months to read all of Jonas's great work, Gianna Hahn, Kyle Goon, so much more coming for you over the next coming days. Please like, rate, review, subscribe. Write us a good review on Apple Podcasts of the Banner Ravens podcast, and I will read it out here on the show. That's a guarantee. 5-star review. Would very much appreciate it. At Paul Mancano is my Twitter handle. Jonas is at Jonas_Shaffer. At All Banner Sports is where you can follow us as well. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll catch you next time.